Oh. Oh, oh. Now. No. What? Pups are looking at me. I had someone ask me, what do you have in this mug that you drink all the time? You always say it's hot leaf juice, but is it really? Usually it is. Or it could be water, it could be soda, it could be whiskey. You don't know. I'll follow it up with this. That's not water. I forgot what I put in there. It is hot leaf juice in there today, though. This is... I You can taste the earth. I've been trying to be better about drinking tea more often because I want to. And I drink a full thing of tea every day that I do a recording. And by a full thing, I mean one of these... It's not really a tankard, but it's not a goblet. I drink one of these shits. I have tea every time I record. So, yeah. There's a thing. Anyway, we're going on about Cress. I'm trying to read this book. Yeah. Let's see if I can do this without burping. That'd be fantastic. Chapter 20. Cress awoke to a dizzying assortment of sensations. Her legs throbbed and the bottoms of her feet ached. The weight of the sand that they'd buried themselves in to keep warm pressed down from her neck to toes. Her scalp was tingling from its strange new lightness. Her skin felt dry and scratchy, her lips brittle. Thorne stirred beside her, moving slowly so as not to disturb the square of parachute material they'd draped over themselves to keep wind-blown sand out of their faces, though the grain in Cress's ears and nose proved that it hadn't been entirely effective. Yep, there it is. And it's because I'm drinking tea. I drink tea and I burp. I don't get it. Every inch of her body was covered in the stuff. Sand under her fingernails, sand at the corners of her lips, sand in her hair and in the folds of her earlobes. Attempting to rub the dry sleep from her eyelashes proved a difficult, painstaking operation. "Hold still," said Thorne, settling a palm on her arm. "The tarp may have gotten some dew. We shouldn't let it go to waste." "Dew?" "Water that comes from the ground in the morning." That comes up from the ground in the morning. She knew what dew was, but it seemed silly to expect it in this landscape. Still, the air did seem almost damp around her, and she didn't argue when Thorne instructed her to find the tarp's corners and lift them up, sending whatever moisture there was down to its middle. What they found, when they had shimmied out from beneath it, was a little less than a single gulp of water, muddied from the sand that had blown up onto the fabric overnight. She described their underwhelming success to Thorne and watched disappointment crease his brow, though it soon faded with a shrug. "At least we still have plenty of water from the satellite." Plenty being their last 2 bottles full. Cress looked out at the brightening horizon. After walking nearly the entire night, Cress doubted they could have slept for more than a couple hours, and her feet felt like they would fall off with the next step. She was disheartened when she looked up at the mountains and discovered they didn't seem any closer now than they had the evening before. "How are your eyes?" she asked. "Well, I've been told that they're dreamy, but I'll let you decide for yourself." Flushing, she turned back to him. Thorne had his arms crossed over his chest in a devil-may-care grin, but there was something strained beneath it. She realized that the lightness in his tone had also rung false, covering up whatever frustrations were simmering just beneath his cavalier attitude. "I could disagree," she murmured, though she immediately wanted to crawl back beneath the parachute and hide from embarrassment. It was worth it to see Thorne's grin become a little less forced. They packed up their camp, drank some water, and retied the towels around Cress's ankles. All the while, taunting morning dew steamed and disappeared around them. The temperature was already climbing. Before closing up their pack, Thorne shook out the sheets and made Cress wrap one around herself like a robe, then adjusted his own sheet to make a hooded cloak that came over his brow. "Is your head covered?" he asked, brushing his foot along the ground until he found the metal bar he'd been using as a cane. Cress tried her best to mimic the way he'd covered himself before confirming that it was. before confirming that it was. Good. Your skin is going to crisp up like bacon soon enough. This will help for a little while at least. She fidgeted with the cumbersome sheet while trying to guide Thorne up the slope they'd camped on. She was still exhausted and half numb from walking. Every limb throbbed. They haven't traversed 4 dunes before Cress stumbled, landing on her knees. Thorne dug his heels into the ground for purchase. Cress? I'm fine, she said, pulling herself up and rubbing the sand from her shins. Just a little drained. I'm not used to all this exercise. Thorne's hands were hanging in mid-air, like he'd meant to help pull her to her feet. But she noticed it too late. Slowly, they sank to his sides. Can you keep going? Yes, I just need to get into a rhythm again. She hoped it was true and that her legs wouldn't be loose cables all day long. We'll walk until it gets too hot, then rest. We don't want to exert ourselves too much, especially under the full sun. Cress started down the dune again, counting their steps to bide the time. 10 steps. 25. 50. The sand grew hot, singeing the soles of her feet through the towel. The sun climbed. Her imagination circled through her favorite fantasies, anything to keep herself distracted. She was a shipwrecked pirate from the Second Era. She was an athlete training for a cross-country journey. She was an android who had no sense of exhaustion, who could march on and on and on. But the dreams became more and more fleeting, reality pushing them aside with pain and discomfort and thirst. She began to hope that Thorne would let them stop and relax, but he didn't. They trudged on. Thorne was right about the sheets, which kept the merciless sun from scorching her, and she became grateful for the dampness of her own sweat keeping her cool. She began counting again as sweat dripped down the backs of her knees, and though she felt awful for thinking it, part of her was glad Thorne couldn't see her in this state. Not that he was immune to the trials of the desert. His face was red, his hair messed from rubbing against his makeshift hood, and dirt streaked down his cheeks where there was the shadow of facial hair. As it grew hotter, Thorne encouraged Cress to finish off the water they'd opened in the morning, which she drank with relish, only afterward realizing that Thorne hadn't taken any for himself. She was still thirsty, but the day was stretching on in front of them, and they had only one more bottle. Though Thorne had told her they shouldn't ration it, she couldn't bring herself to ask for more if he wasn't drinking also. She began to sing to herself to pass the time, humming all the pretty songs she could recall from her music collection on the satellite. She let the familiar melodies distract her. Walking became easier for a time. That one's pretty. She paused, and it took a moment for her to realize Thorne was talking about the song she was singing, and it took another moment for her to remember which one it had been. Thank you, she said uncertainly. She'd never sang in front of anyone, never been complimented on it. It's a popular lullaby on Luna. I used to think that I'd been named for it, before I realized what a common name crescent is. Hang on, the top of my mouth, roof of my mouth is itchy. That was weird. Oh, that's very weird. Yeah. She sang through the first verse again. Sweet crescent moon up in the sky, you sing your song so sweetly after sunshine passes by. Yeah. I'm going to try that again. Hang on, because I feel like I didn't give that justice. Sweet crescent moon up in the sky, you sing your song so sweetly after sunshine passes by. Why not? When she glanced back at Thorne, he had a faint smile on his lips. Your mom sang you a lot of lullabies? Oh no, they can tell you're a shell right when you're born, so I was only a few days when my parents gave me up to be killed. I don't remember them at all. His smile disappeared, and after a long silence, he said, You probably shouldn't be singing now that I think of it. You'll lose moisture through your mouth. Oh. Pressing her lips tight together, Cress placed her fingertips against Thorne's arm, the signal that had come on to mean they were starting down a slope, and slogged on. Her skin had been scraped raw by the heat, despite the shelter of her makeshift robe. But she was propelled on by the thought that it was nearly midday, and while midday would bring about the highest temperatures yet, Thorne had also promised a respite from walking. "All right," Thorne finally said, as if the words were being dragged up from his throat. "That's enough. Let's rest until the temperature goes down again." Cress groaned with relief. She would have kept walking all day if he had asked it of her, but how glad she was that he hadn't. "Do you see any shade at all, or some place that looks like it might be shaded when the sun starts going down?" Cress squinted across the dunes. Though there was some shade over the occasional hillock, at high noon it was almost non-existent. Still, they were coming up on a big hill that would soon cast some shadows. It was the best they could do. "This way," she said, spurred on by the promise of rest. But as they crested one more dune, her eye caught on something in the distance. She gasped, grabbing Thorne's arm. "What is it?" She gaped at the glorious sight, struggling to find words to describe it. Blue and green, a stark contrast against the orange desert sand. "Water! And trees!" "An oasis?" "Yes, it must be!" Relief spilled over her. She began to tremble with the promise of shade, water, rest. "Come on! It isn't far!" she said, plowing through the sand with a renewed energy. "Cress! Cress, wait! Reserve your energy!" "But we're almost there! Cress!" She barely heard him. Already she could imagine the cool water slipping down her throat, the breeze beneath the palm's canopy. Maybe there would be food, some strange tropical earthen food she'd never tasted, that would be juicy and crisp and refreshing. It's going to be a mirage. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a mirage. But mostly she thought of collapsing into a nice patch of shade, cooled and protected from the sun, sleeping until nighttime brought the return of cooler temperatures and endless stars. Thorne trooped after her, having given up trying to make her stop, and soon she realized she was being cruel to make him go so fast. She slowed a little, but kept her eyes on the lake that shimmered at the base of a dune. "Cress, are you sure?" he said when he'd caught his breath. "Of course I'm sure. It's right there." "But, Cress..." Her pace slowed. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "No, just... All right, I can keep up. Let's get to this oasis." She beamed and grabbed his free hand, leading him over the desert's ripples and tides. Her fantasies took over, eclipsing her fatigue. The towel had nearly rubbed the soles of her feet raw, and her calves were sunburned where her sheet didn't protect them, and her brain was swirling with thirst, but they were so close, so close. And yet, as she slipped along the powdery sand, it seemed that the oasis never came any closer. It always lingered at the horizon, as if the shimmering trees were receding with each step she took. She plowed on, desperate. The distances were deceptive, but soon they would reach it, if only they kept moving, one step at a time, one foot in front of the other. "Cress!" "Captain, it isn't far." "Cress, is it getting any closer?" She stumbled, her breath slowing drastically until she stopped, gasping for breath. "Captain?" "Do you see it getting closer? Do the trees look bigger than they were before?" She squinted at the water, the trees, the most gorgeous sight, and swiped her sleeve over her face. She was so hot, but no sweat was left behind on the cloth. The truth was so painful, she almost didn't have the strength to say it. "No, but that's... how could..." Thorne sighed, but it was not a disappointed sigh, merely resigned. "It's a mirage, Cress. It's the light playing trick on your eyes." "But I can see it! There are even islands in the lake, and trees!" "I know. Mirages always seem real, but you're only seeing what you want to see. It's a trick, Cress. It's not there." She was mesmerized by how the water rippled in little waves, how the trees trembled like a breeze was teasing their branches. It looked so real, so tangible. She could almost smell it, almost taste the cool wind blowing toward her. Cress barely managed to stay standing, her fear of being scorched by the hot sand alone giving her strength. "It's all right. Lots of people see mirages in the desert." "But... I didn't know. I should have known. I've heard stories, but I didn't think it could look so real." Thorne's fingers brushed against the sheet, finding her hand. "You're not going to cry, are you?" he said, his tone a mixture of gentle and stern. Crying was not... Sorry, I'm popular, I'm getting texts. Crying was not allowed. Not with waters so precious. "No," she whispered, and she meant it. Not that she didn't want to cry, but because she wasn't sure her body could make enough tears. "Good. Come on, find us a sand dune to sit down for a while." Cress peeled her attention away from the fleeting, bitter illusion. Scanning the nearest dunes, she led them toward a southward-facing slope. The moment she was over the crest, it was as if a thin string that had been holding her up had snapped. Cress let out a pained groan and collapsed into the sand. Thorne brought the blanket and parachute square out of the pack and laid it out for them to sit on. To keep them off the hot sand, they then pulled the corners over their heads like a canopy that blocked out the sun's brightness. He put an arm around Cress's shoulders and tugged her against him. She felt so dumb, so betrayed, by the desert, by the sun, by her own eyes. And now the truth was settling upon her. There was no water. There were no trees. Nothing but endless sand, endless sun, endless walking. And they may never make it out. They couldn't go on forever. She doubted she could go on for another day like this. And who knew how long it would take to reach the end of the desert? Not when every sand dune multiplied into 3 or more, when every step toward the mountains seemed to send them even farther into the distance. And they didn't even know that the mountains would offer any protection when they got there. "We're not going to die here," Thorne said, his voice soft and reassuring. Like he'd known exactly where her thoughts had been taking her. "I've been through much worse than this, and I've survived just fine." "You have?" He opened his mouth but paused. "Well, I was in jail for a long time, which wasn't exactly a picnic." She adjusted the towels on her feet. The hair ropes had begun to cut into her skin. "The military wasn't much fun either, come to think of it." "You were only in it for 5 months," she murmured, "and most of that time was spent in flight training." Thorne tilted his head. "How'd you know that?" "Research." She didn't tell him just how much she'd researched into his past, but he didn't ask. And he didn't ask. "Well, so maybe this is the worst I've been through. But it doesn't change the fact that we're going to survive. We'll find civilization. We'll calm the Rampion, and they'll come get us. Then we'll overthrow Levana, and I'll get loads of reward money, and the Commonwealth will pardon my crimes, or whatever, and we'll all live happily ever after." Cress nestled against Thorne's side, trying to believe him. "But first, we have to get out of this desert." He rubbed her shoulder. It was the kind of touch that would have filled her with giddiness and yearning if she hadn't been too tired to feel anything. "You have to trust me, Cress. I'm going to get us out of this." Hang on, I gotta... just 1 second. So what gets me is that it's Marissa Meyer, the author, is really good at describing the terrors of a desert. Having had grown up in a desert myself, yeah, it was pretty goddamn accurate description, you know? Oh, look, I'm popular still. There we go. It's hot. I mean, what else can you say about it? It's really fucking hot. "There," said... Oh, hang on, I have to... Chapter 21. "There," said Dr. Erland, snipping off the ends of the surgery thread. "That's all I can do for him." Cinder wet her lips and found that they had begun to split from dryness. "And... is he going to..." "We'll have to wait and see. He's lucky the bullets didn't puncture a lung, or he wouldn't have made it this far. But he did lose a lot of blood. I'll monitor the anesthetics closely for the next day or 2. We want to keep him sedated. Levana's soldiers are designed as disposable weapons. They are very effective when they're in good health, but their genetic alterations make it difficult for them to rest, even when their bodies need time to recover from injury." Erland's voice is all over the place. She stared down at Wolf's wounds, now sewed together with dark blue thread that formed ugly bumps and ridges where open flesh had been before. Numerous other scars littered his bare chest, long since healed. It was obvious that he had been through a lot. Surely this wouldn't be the end of him, after everything. A table beside her held a tray with 2 small bullets the doctor had removed. They seemed too small to have done so much damage. "I can't let anyone else die," she whispered. The doctor looked up from cleaning the surgical tools. They may be treated as disposable assets to the Queen, but they are also quite resilient. He dropped the scalpel and tweezers into a blue liquid. With proper rest, it's possible that he'll make a full recovery. Possible? She repeated dumbly. It wasn't enough. She slumped down onto the wooden chair beside Wolf's bed and slipped a hand into his, hoping he would appreciate the touch, even though she wasn't Scarlet. She crushed her eyes shut, the wave of remorse flooding over her. Scarlet. Wolf would be furious when he woke up. Furious and devastated. Now perhaps you might deign to tell me how you managed to be in the company of both a lunar soldier and a lunar royal guard, of all the possible allies in this galaxy. She sighed. It took a while to gather her thoughts and find the beginning of such a story. Ultimately, she decided to tell him about tracking down Michelle Benoit, and how she'd been hoping to find out more about the woman who had protected her secret to the death. How she'd been searching for clues about her past, who had brought her to Earth, and why anyone would put so much faith into a child who, at the time, was a mere 3 years old and on the brink of death after the Queen's attempted murder. She explained how they'd followed the paths of clues to Paris, where she learned that Michelle Benoit was dead, but she found her granddaughter instead, Scarlet, and Wolf, and how they became allies, how Wolf was training her to use her mental abilities and to fight. She told him about the attack aboard the Rampion and how Sybil Mira had taken Scarlet, and now it was only her and Wolf, and this guard, who she wanted to trust. She felt she needed to trust, and yet she didn't even know his name. "He said that he serves as princess," Cinder said, the words wispy and thin. "Somehow he knew about me." Erland rubbed his frizzy hair. "Perhaps he overheard Thaumaturge Mira or the Queen herself talking about you. We're lucky that his fealty is to the true crown. Many of Lavanna's minions would just as soon kill you and claim a reward than see you recognized as Queen." "I figured as much." He sneered, like he wasn't happy to have to acknowledge the guard could be an ally after all. "And speaking of recognizing you as the true Queen..." She shriveled into her seat, squeezing Wolf's hand. "Miss Lynn, I have spent years planning for the time when I would find you again. You should have come to me straight away." Cinder wrinkled her nose. "That's precisely why I didn't. And what does that mean?" "When you came to my jail cell and dropped this whole princess thing on me, how was I supposed to react? All of a sudden I went from being nobody to being long-lost royalty, and you expected me to jump up and accept this destiny that you worked out in your head? But did you ever consider that maybe that's not the destiny I want? I wasn't raised to be a princess or a leader. I just needed some time to figure out who I am, where I came from. I thought maybe those answers were in France." "And were they?" She shrugged, remembering the underground lab they found on the Benoit farm, with the suspended animation tank where she had slept half alive for 8 years, where some nameless, faceless person had given her a new name, a new history, and new robotic limbs. "Some of them were." "And how about now? Are you ready to accept your destiny, or are you still searching?" Or no, he would say, "Or are you still searching?" She frowned. "I know that I am who you say I am, and someone has to stop Lavanna. If that someone has to be me, well, yes, I accept that. I'm ready." She glanced down at Wolf and bit back her next words. "At least I thought I was ready before I ruined everything." That part was internal, by the way. She didn't actually say that. "Good," said the doctor, "because it's time we developed a plan. Queen Lavanna cannot be allowed to rule Earth any longer, and she certainly cannot be allowed to rule Earth." "I know. I agree. I had a plan, actually. We had a plan." He raised an eyebrow at her. We were going to use the wedding to our advantage, especially with all the media that's going to be there. We were going to get past palace security, and I was going to sneak into the ceremony and stop it. Stop the wedding, Erlon said, sounding unimpressed. Yes, I was going to tell everyone who I am, with all the cameras and the media and the world watching. I was going to insist that Kai couldn't marry her. I was going to tell the world that Levana's plans to invade all earthen countries, so that the other leaders would refuse to accept her as a world leader. And then I would demand that Levana relinquish her crown to me. She pulled away from Wolf, finding that her palm had grown too warm. She rubbed it nervously on her pant leg. Dr. Erlon's expression had gone dark. He reached forward and pinched Cinder hard above her elbow. Ow! Hey! For a moment I thought you might be another one of my hallucinations. Surely your plan couldn't be that stupid. It's not stupid. The news would go viral in minutes. There's nothing Levana could do to stop it. It certainly would go viral. Everyone would be clamoring to witness the tirade of the crazy cyborg who fancies herself a princess. They could test my blood like you did. I can prove it. No doubt Her Majesty would stand by patiently while you did so. He huffed, as if he were talking to a small child. Queen Levana has her talents so deep into the Commonwealth that you would be dead before you would finish the word princess. Your Emperor Kai would do anything to appease her right now, to ensure that war doesn't break out again, and to get his hands on the Lethamotosis antidote. He wouldn't risk angering her just to validate the claim of a 16-year-old girl who was already a wanted criminal. She crossed her arms. He might. He raised an eyebrow at her, and she sulked in her chair. Fine, Cinder said. What do you suggest? You clearly know all about this political revolution stuff, so please enlighten me, oh wrinkled one. I like that line. Dr. Erlon grabbed his hat off a small writing desk and pulled it onto his head. Actually, no, hang on. I want more attention paid to that line. Very much so. Fine, Cinder said. What do you suggest? You clearly know all about this political revolution stuff. Please enlighten me, oh wrinkled one. It's a really good line. Dr. Erlon grabbed his hat off a small writing desk and pulled it onto his head. You can begin by learning some manners, or no one will ever believe you could be royalty. Hang on 2 seconds. I'm terribly sorry, guys. Right. I'm sure that poor etiquette is the #1 reason for most failed revolutions. Are you quite finished? Not hardly. He pinned her with a glare, and she glared right back. Finally, Cinder rolled her eyes. Yes, I'm finished. Good, because we have a lot to discuss, beginning with how we are going to get you back to Luna. Luna? Yes, Luna, the rock in the sky that you are destined to rule. I trust you're familiar with it? You expect me to go to Luna? Not today, but eventually, yes. You're wasting your time with this wedding business and viral media. The people of Luna don't care what the people of Earth think, but claiming your identity here won't persuade them to rebel against their monarch, or crown you as their queen. Of course it will. I'm their rightful heir. My dog melted. I'm just taking a look at her. She drew back, stunned by her own words. She didn't think she'd ever felt so... She didn't think she'd ever felt so invested in her identity, and determined to claim her place. It was a strange feeling, bordering on pride. You are the rightful heir, said the doctor, but you have to convince the people of Luna that the author is not disgusting and he keeps burping. But you also need to convince them, the people of Luna, not the people of Earth. The lunar people must be informed that you are alive. Only with them on your side can you expect to have any success in claiming your birthright. Of course, Levana will not give up easily. She massaged her neck, waiting for the adrenaline warnings to dissipate. Fine. Let's say you're right and this is the only way. How are we supposed to get on Luna? Aren't all the entry ports underground? And, I might guess, heavily monitored? Precisely my point. We must find a way to sneak you through the ports. Obviously, we can't use your ship. He trailed off, rubbing his cheek. It will require careful strategizing. Oh, good, more strategizing. My favorite. In the meantime, I suggest you not venture too far outside the heart of this town, and stay inside your ship as much as possible. It isn't entirely safe here. Cinder glowered. In case you didn't notice, everyone already saw me. There's no hiding me now. That isn't what I mean. This area has suffered in more cases of letumosis than any other on Earth. Although there haven't been any severe breakouts in over a year, we can't let our guard down. Not with you. I'm immune. Remember that little discovery that kicked off this whole mess? He sighed, long and slow. The defeat in his expression shot a dart of worry down her spine. Doctor? I have seen evidence that the disease is mutating, said Dr. Erland. And the Lunars might no longer be immune. At least not all of us. Her skin began to crawl. It was amazing how fast the old fears returned. After weeks of being invincible in the face of one of Earth's most merciless killers, the threat was back. Her immunity could be compromised. And she was in Africa, where it had all started. A knock startled them both. The guard stood in the hall, damp from a recent shower and wearing some earthen military clothes found aboard the Rampion. Though his wounds were no longer visible, Cinder noticed that he was carrying himself stiffly, favoring his unwounded side. In his hands was a tray of flatbread that smelled thickly of garlic. Heard you talking. I thought your surgery might be finished, he said. How's your friend? Hang on, so we have Kai, who's my normal speaking voice, which is this right now, and we need to find a way to stop Lavana because that's the only thing that we can do. But I need to make sure that Cinder's going to be okay. That's Kai. Where's Scarlet? Scarlet, you don't understand. I could have saved your grandma. I was right there, but there was nothing I could have done. That's Wolf. Captain Carswell Thorne isn't afraid of anything, and I'll tell you what, Cress, one way or another, despite my lack of vision, we'll be able to get our way out of this desert, because while I can't see, I can see the path ahead. And then Jason, and Dr. Erland, we have this sort of foreign kind of... You need to understand, Cinder, that we have to follow the plan if things... But he's deeper. We have to follow the plan if things are to go the way we need them to. But then Jason... He's from the moon. He's a guard. We have to figure this one out. Deeper? I heard you talking. Thought your surgery might be finished. No, maybe not that deep. He's blonde. Sports. I'm thinking of like a soccer player or like some sort of... Cross country. Cross country. That's the sort of voice I'm thinking of. Heard you talking. No. That's too Carswell. Heard you talking. Thought your surgery... No, too deep. Heard you talking. I thought your surgery might be finished. No, but with a different... Heard you talking. No. Captain Carswell Thorne. See, I can't do this, and that's very pronunciated and very vocal. Heard you talking. I thought your surgery might be finished. How's your friend? Yes, right here. Deep, slower, but even paced. Each word is measured, without going too far down the road. Heard you talking. I thought your surgery might be finished. How's your friend? No, how's your friend? Cinder glanced at Wolf. He too would be vulnerable. Everyone in this room was lunar, she realized with a jolt. If Dr. Erland was right, they were all vulnerable right now. Cinder had to swallow to unclog her voice. He's still alive. Leaving Wolf's side, she held a hand toward the guard. I'm Cinder, by the way. He squinted. I know who you are. Yeah, but I figured a formal introduction would be nice, now that we're on the same side. Is that what you've decided? Cinder frowned, but before she could respond, he'd shifted the flatbread to his other hand and grasped hers. Jason Clay. Honored. Not knowing how to read his tone, which sounded almost mocking. So that'd be Jason Clay. Honored. Yeah, like that. Cinder pulled away and glanced at the doctor, who had his fingers pressed against Wolf's wrist. Evidently, he had no intention of joining the introductions. Cinder wiped her palms on her pants and eyed the tray. So what? You can shoot a gun, fly a spaceship, and bake? This was brought by some kids. He pushed the tray toward Cinder. They said it was for you, but I told them you couldn't be bothered. She took it awkwardly. For me? The cyborg, to be specific. Seemed unlikely there would be two of you around. Huh. I wonder why. I suspect it will not be the first gift you receive from the citizens of Farafara. Oh, that's Dr. Erland. I suspect this will not be the first gift you receive from the citizens of Farafara, said Dr. Erland. What for? These people don't know me. Of course they do, or at least they know of you. We are not so cut off from the world here as you might think. Even I had the reputation when I first arrived. She set the tray down on the desk. And they haven't turned you in? What about the reward money and the fact you're lunar? Don't they care? Instead of answering, Dr. Erland slid his gaze toward Jason, who was now leaning statue-like beside the door. It was easy to forget his presence in a room when he stood so still and said so little. No doubt his training as a guard had taught him that. No doubt he was used to going unnoticed. But while Cinder had made the choice to trust him, it was obvious from the doctor's expression that she was so far alone in that decision. Right, said Jason, pushing himself off the wall. I'll go check on your ship. Make sure no one's backing out screws and calling them souvenirs. He left the hotel room without looking back, his limp almost passing for a swagger. I know he seems a little abrasive, she said once he was gone. But he knows who I am, and he saved my life, and Wolf's. We should treat him as an ally. You may choose to reveal all your secrets, Miss Lin, but it does not mean I must reveal mine, or those of the people in this town. What do you mean? The people here do not care that we are lunar, because we are not the only ones. I estimate 15% of the population of Farafara and other neighboring oases is made up of lunars, or those of lunar descent. This is where many of our people choose to come after they escape, and they have been immigrating here since the time of Queen Chanry, perhaps even earlier. 15%? She asked. And the Earthens know? It is not widely discussed, but it seems to be common knowledge. They have come to live in harmony together. Once the plague struck, many lunars took to nursing the sick and burying the dead, as they themselves did not catch the sickness. Of course, no one knew they were the original carriers. By the time that theory had posed, the two races had become too intermingled. They work together now, helping each other survive. But it's illegal to harbor lunar fugitives. Levana would be furious. Yes, but who would tell her? No one cares about the poor, diseased town in the Sahara. Thus swarming, she picked up a piece of the bread, glistening with golden oil and speckled with herbs. Or it's herbs, because there's a fucking H in it. The soft inside was still steaming when she pulled it apart. It was a gift. From lunars. From her own people. Her eyes widened and she gaped up at the doctor again. Do they know about me? He sniffed. They know that you stood up against the Queen. They know that you continue to defy her. For the first time since she'd arrived, Cinder thought she detected a smile beneath the doctor's annoyed expression. And I may have led them to believe that, one of these days, you intend to assassinate her. What? Assassinate her? It worked, he said with an unapologetic shrug. These people will follow you anywhere. Okay, look. So, I'm all for killing Queen Levana, alright, because she deserves it. Not that, anyone has the right to say who gets to live or die. You know who deserves to be assassinated, though? Fucking Sybil. Sybil deserves that shit. Sybil deserves to be murdered in cold blood. Sybil deserves to get stabbed for what she did to Cress, but also because she's just so evil. I can understand why Dr. Erland needed to tell the people that Cinder was going to kill the queen, because what better way to earn the love of the people than by saying you're going to depose and get rid of the one person that made them want to be there? Because all these fugitives, they're on Earth because Queen Levana refused to let her people leave the planet, because she understands that she's not well received on Earth and that they would want to rise against her. It's her way of preventing rebellion. So they all have a problem with Queen Levana, whether they're shells or not, because of the laws and rules that she had in place. That's why they ran away in the first place. Hi, Baba. She was rolling around in the mud, so her back's all fucked up. Come here. I want to hold you. I want you to say hi to everybody. Okay, she's walking off. Fine. I want you to say hi anyway. I wonder why Jason said, "So that's what you've decided," or something like that, when Cinder said we're on the same side. I wonder, is he going to betray her? It's like, yeah, I'm on your side because you're the princess, but also I have respect for Queen Levana. I don't know. I guess the only way to find out is to keep reading, so let's just do that. Chapter 22. Okay, so this is a new character. And it's a guy, but he's a lunar thaumaturge, so his voice is a lot more up. Lunar thaumaturge Amory Park, Your Majesty! Kai and Thorne stood as the thaumaturge glided past Nancy into Kai's office. Though Amory bowed respectfully to Kai as he came to stand on the opposite side of his desk, chapter 22 by the way, his so low that the long sleeves of his maroon jacket nearly brushed the carpet, there was something supremely disrespectful in his air that always set Kai on edge. He had never been quite able to pinpoint what it was about this man. Maybe it was the way he always wore a faint smile out the corners of his lips, or perhaps how that smile only reached his eyes when he was using his gift to manipulate someone. "Thank you for joining us," said Kai, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please make yourself comfortable." "My pleasure," said Amory, settling gracefully into the offered chair. "Anything for Luna's future king." The designation made Kai squirm. It was easy to forget that he would be taking on a new title as much as Levana was. But the difference was that Luna had very strict laws governing who could be put into positions of power, and Earthens certainly did not make the cut. He would be crowned king consort, meaning he would be a pretty figurehead with virtually no power whatsoever. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth did not have the same failsafes put in place. Kai's great-great-great-grandfather, the country's first emperor, must have trusted his descendants to make sound decisions on their spouses. "I wanted to discuss with you a discovery recently made by the Earthen Union," Kai said, nodding at Thorne. His advisor stepped closer to the desk and set a port screen in its center. With a click, the holograph of Earth with 327 lunar spaceships surrounding it flickered to life above the desk. Kai watched the thaumaturge closely, but the man did not show an iota of a reaction to the holograph, even with hundreds of yellow dots reflected like fireflies in his dark eyes. "This is a real-time imagery of Earth and its surrounding space," said Kai. "The markers have all been confirmed to be lunar spacecrafts." Amory's cheek seemed to twitch, as though he was on the verge of laughing, yet his voice remained smooth as caramel when he spoke. "It is a very striking picture indeed, Your Majesty. Thank you for sharing it with me." Clenching his teeth, "Thank you for sharing it with me." There we go. Clenching his teeth, Kai lowered himself into his own chair. He was tempted to keep standing as a show of power, but he'd been around Lunars long enough to show that mind games rarely had any effect. And at least, when he was sitting, he could pretend to be comfortable. Pretended that he hadn't been dreading this conversation all day. "You're very welcome," Kai deadpanned. "Now perhaps you can explain to me what they're all doing up there." "Recreation!" Amory leaned back, leisurely crossing his legs. "We have many wealthy families on Luna who enjoy the occasional holiday cruise through our galaxy. I'm told it can be very relaxing." Kai narrowed his eyes. And these holiday cruises routinely bring them within 10,000 kilometers of Earth, where they remained anchored for days? I am sure the view afforded by them by such a location must be quite lovely. One side of Amory's mouth quirked. Breathtaking sunrises, I'm told. Interesting, because all 327 of these ships bear the insignia of the Lunar Crown. It seems to me that these are actually Crown-sanctioned ships, either conducting some sort of surveillance on the Earthen Union or preparing an attack that should war be declared. Fuck. Amory's expression remained neutral. My mistake. Perhaps I should have said that we have many wealthy Crown-sanctioned families who enjoy the occasional holiday. They held each other's gazes for a long moment, while the holographic oceans sparkled beneath the sun, while the white clouds swirled through the atmosphere. I don't know why Queen Lavanna has chosen to threaten us at this time and in this manner, Kai finally said, but it is an unnecessary show of force and one that trivializes all that we are attempting to accomplish with our peaceful negotiations. I want these ships to return to Luna within the next 24 hours. And if Her Majesty refuses? Kai's fingers twitched, but he forced them to relax. Then I cannot take responsibility for the actions of the rest of the Union. After the lunar attacks that occurred on the soil of all 6 Earthen countries, it would be within the jurisdiction of any one of my peers to meet this blatant threat of war with their own show of force. Forgive me, Your Majesty. You did not say before that these lunar ships had entered into the territorial boundaries of the Earthen Union. Surely, if Her Majesty was aware that we have intruded into your legal atmospheric space, she would have them removed at once. He leaned forward, showing a flash of white teeth. You are insinuating that Luna has trespassed into your legal boundaries, aren't you? This time, Kai couldn't keep his hands from curling into fists beneath the desk. At this time, they are outside the territorial boundaries, but that does not... So you're saying Luna has committed no crime as laid out by the Union's own laws. Then how, exactly, would a show of force against these ships be warranted? We will not be bullied into accepting any more of your demands, Kai said. Her Majesty must know that she is already walking a very narrow tightrope. My patience is wearing thin, and the Union is tired of bowing to Lavanna's every whim, only to have her gratuitous displays of power thrown into our faces again and again. Queen Lavanna has no more demands to make of you, said the thaumaturge. The Commonwealth has been exceedingly accommodating to our requests, and I find it unfortunate that you see the presence of these thus far peaceful lunar ships as threatening. If they aren't there to send us a message, then why are they there? Amory shrugged. Perhaps they are waiting for the finalization of the peace alliance between Luna and the Commonwealth. After all, Her Majesty has signed your Treaty of Bremen. Peaceful travel between our 2 nations will be made possible, even encouraged. And the Commonwealth really is so beautiful this time of year. Kai's stomach writhed as the thaumaturge uncrossed his legs and stood. I trust that will be all, Your Majesty, he said, tucking his hands into his wide red sleeves. Unless you also wanted to discuss the approved symphony numbers to be played during the wedding feast? Flushing, Kai pushed himself off his chair and turned off the holograph. This is not the end of this discussion. Amory politely lifted his head. If you insist, Your Majesty, I will inform my queen that you wish to discuss this matter with her in due course, though perhaps it would be prudent to wait until after the ceremony. As it is, she is quite distracted. He bowed, and when he stood tall again, his face had taken on a taunting grin. I will be sure to give my queen your love next time I speak with her. Kai was shaking with rage by the time Amory strode out of his office. How was it that Lunars didn't even have to use their mind powers, and they still drove him mad every time he talked to them? He had the sudden urge to throw something, but the port screen he was holding belonged to Torin, so he kindly passed it back to his advisor instead. Thanks for all your help, he muttered. Torin, who hadn't said a word during the meeting, loosened his necktie. You did not need my help, Your Majesty. I could not have argued your points any better than you did. He sighed and clipped the port to his belt. Unfortunately, Thaumaturge Park made all very sound points himself. In the eyes of intergalactic law, Luna has not yet committed a crime. At least, not in the case of these ships. Maybe the intergalactic laws need to be revisited. Perhaps, Your Majesty. Kai collapsed back into his chair. Do you think he was just trying to get a rise out of me, or are all those ships really going to invade the Commonwealth once the alliance is forged? Somehow, I'd just assumed Levana would be content to call herself Empress. I didn't think she'd want to bring her whole army here and let them make themselves right at home. Saying the words out loud made him flinch with how naive he sounded. Kai cursed beneath his breath. You know, I'm beginning to think that I entered into this marriage thing a bit hastily. You made the best decision you could at the time. Kai rubbed his hands together, attempting to dispel the feeling of vulnerability the thaumaturge's presence had given him. Thorne, he said, sliding his eyes toward his advisor. If there was a way to avoid this marriage, and keep us from going to war, and get that antidote, you would agree that would be the best course of action. Wouldn't you? Thorne lowered himself slowly into the chair that the thaumaturge had vacated. I'm almost afraid to ask, Your Majesty. Clearing his throat, Kai called for Nancy. A second later, her short, glossy white body appeared in the doorway. Nancy, have you found anything new? As she approached the desk, her sensor flashed, once at him and once at Thorne. Permission clearance for advisor Con Thorne requested. Thorne's eyebrow jutted up, but Kai ignored it. Clearance granted. Nancy came to a stop beside the desk. I've run a full report on Michelle Benoit, including a detailed timeline of her activities, occupations, achievements, and military service, and biographical information on 11 persons who seemed close enough to warrant attention. My data retrieval system is broadening the search to neighbors and potential acquaintances beginning in the year 85 TE. Who is Michelle Benoit? Thorne asked in a tone that suggested he didn't really want to know the answer. So then now he would say it as, who is Michelle Benoit? Michelle Benoit was born in 56 TE, said Nancy, and is noted most for her 28 years of service in the European Federation Armed Forces, 20 of which were served as Wing Commander. She received a Distinguished Service Medal for piloting the diplomatic mission to Luna in the year 85 TE. The mission included... I think she might have something to do with Princess Celine, Kai interrupted, tapping some fast instructions into the built-in netscreen on his desk. A moment later, a satellite photo of farmlands in southern France appeared across the screen. She owns this farm. He pointed to a dark spot where the ground had recently been scorched. And this field is where Cinder landed the first time she returned to Earth, right before the attack. So, we assume that Cinder believes that Michelle Benoit is attached to the princess as well. Thorne's face darkened, but he seemed to be withholding judgment until Kai finished. I see. Nancy, have you found anything useful? Useful is a subjective term relative to the actions that are taken prior to the receiving information and the resulting... Nancy, have you found anything relevant? Relevant? Relevant to what? Said Thorne. What are you hoping to find? Princess Celine. Thorne sighed. Again? Yes, again, said Kai. He gestured toward the sky. Aren't you the one who told me we had to try to stand up against Levana? I didn't mean by chasing ghosts. But think about it. She's the true heir to the lunar throne. You honestly don't think finding her would give us an advantage? I'm sorry. Thorne's mouth pressed into a thin line, but to Kai's relief, he seemed to be considering the question. I don't want you to be distracted from the things that are truly important. Kai snorted. The important things, like jade centerpieces and whether my wedding sash should have flying bats or a pair of cranes embroidered on it? This isn't a joke, clearly. Rubbing his forehead, Thorne eyed Nancy for a long moment before casting his gaze toward the ceiling. Your Majesty, according to Lynn Cinder's own warnings, Queen Levana already means to murder you because you were attempting to find the princess before. What will her retaliation be when she realizes you haven't stopped? It doesn't matter. She already intends to kill me, so what else can she do? And Princess Celine would be the true heir. Her existence would negate any claim Levana has to her throne. Thorne dropped his shoulders. And you think that by finding a girl who's what? 15 years old? 16. A 16-year-old girl, you believe that finding her is what the Commonwealth needs right now, more than anything else? Corin gulped, but his answer was solid. I do. Torrance settled back in his seat, resigned. All right, fine. I won't try to dissuade you. He eyed Nancy again, this time with distrust, as if this were the android's fault. Please continue. Nancy launched back into her report. Michelle Benoit disappeared from her farm on 11 August. Her identity chip was left in her home, having been removed from her wrist. Evidence did not indicate whether or not there had been a struggle. 2 weeks later, her granddaughter, Scarlett, who had lived with Benoit for 11 years, traveled from their home in Rio, France, to Paris. Tracking records indicate she was in Paris for 2 days before her identity chip went off the grid. Presumably, the chip was removed and destroyed. Timeline cross-examination indicates that her ID chip was last seen near an abandoned Paris opera house, at the same time that a nearby scan bank machine recorded what appears to be the landing and takeoff of a 214 Rampion. Satellite feeds, however, picked up no such spaceship at that location. Deductive reasoning leads me to believe that this was the ship on which Lynn Cinder is hiding, and that Scarlett Benoit may have boarded the ship at that time. Kai frowned and was glad when even Torin looked intrigued by this information. Cinder made a special trip to Paris for this girl? My logic aptitude suggests this is a possibility. What else do we know about this Scarlett? Oh, no, that would be Kai. What else do we know about this Scarlett? According to her ID records, she came to live with Michelle Benoit at 1:11:15. At 1:15 TE, 2 years after the recorded death of Princess Celine. Her birth record indicates that she is 18 years old. However, there was no hospital record for Scarlett Benoit's birth, and her data was not input until she was 4 years old, so we cannot confirm the validity of any of her records. You lost me. Scarlett Benoit was not born in a hospital. Neither was her father, Luc Raoul Benoit. Without official records, we must treat any information about their births as circumspect. It is possible that everything we know about Scarlett Benoit is false information. Kai pressed his hands onto the desk. Are you saying there's a chance this girl, Scarlett Benoit, is really Princess Celine? It is a possibility that cannot be proved or disproved at this time, but I have found no evidence to warrant a dismissal of this hypothesis. Kai filled his lungs, feeling that he hadn't taken a full breath in weeks. And Cinder knows it. Cinder figured it out. And now she has her. Cinder's found the princess. Your Majesty, said Torn, you are jumping to some large conclusions. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Thorne scowled. I will withhold my opinion on the matter until we have some information that is based on more than speculation. Android speculation, said Kai, pointing at Nancy. It's better than regular speculation. He pushed himself out of his chair and began to pace in front of the grand picture window. Princess Celine was alive. He just knew it. And Cinder had found her. He almost laughed. I'm surprised to see you taking this all with such good humor, Your Majesty, said Torin. I would think you would be horrified with this turn of events. Why? She's alive! If this girl is the missing princess, then she is currently being held captive by a dangerous felon, Your Majesty. What? Cinder's not dangerous! Torin seemed unexpectedly furious as he, too, launched himself to his feet. Have you forgotten that she is lunar? She was a lunar who had contacts working within this very palace. She coerced you, the most protected person in the country, into giving her a personal invitation to our annual ball, then infiltrated it with, I can only assume, the intention of provoking Queen Lavanna. She escaped from a high-security prison and has managed to evade capture by our entire military, which ultimately led to an attack that killed thousands of Earthens. How could you possibly say she isn't dangerous? Kai straightened his spine. Lavanna attacked us, not Cinder. Groaning, Torin rubbed his fingers over his temples. It had been a long time since Kai had seen that expression on his advisor. The expression that indicated he thought Kai was a moron. Indignation flared inside him. And for the record, she declined my invitation to the ball. She only came to warn me. And Dr. Erland... He hesitated. He still didn't know what to think about her relationship with Dr. Erland. Levana wants her killed. I don't see that we've given her much choice other than to run. Your Majesty, I worry that your feelings for this girl are causing a bias that could jeopardize your ability to make logical decisions where she's concerned. Kai's face grew warm. Was he so transparent? I'm still trying to find her, aren't I? I still have half the military searching out for her. But are you trying to find her or this princess? He gestured at Nancy. If they're together, what does it matter? We can find them both. And then you will give Luna a new queen and Cinder will be pardoned? I don't know. Maybe? Is it such a horrible thing to hope for? She's still one of them. You've said yourself that she lied to you about everything. What do you know about her? She stole an ID chip out of a dead girl's wrist. She helped a known thief escape from prison. Do I need to go on? Cringing, Kai spun back to face the window, crossing his arms stubbornly over his chest. He hated that every word Thorne had said was indisputable, while every hope Nancy had given him was based on vague observations and hazy guesses. I understand that you feel partially responsible for condemning her to execution, Thorne said, his tone growing gentler. But you have to stop idolizing her. I don't idolize her! No, he wouldn't say that. He would say idolize. I don't idolize her. Torin gave him a speculative look until Kai began to grow uncomfortable. I might admire her sometimes, but even you have to admit that it's pretty impressive what she's done. Plus, she stood up to Levana at the ball. You weren't impressed by that? Just a little? Torin buttoned his suit jacket. My point, Your Majesty, is that you seem to be putting an awful lot of faith in a girl you know virtually nothing about, and who has caused us a great deal of trouble. Kai scowled. Torin was right, of course. He didn't know anything about Cinder, no matter how much he felt that he did. But he was the Emperor. He had resources. He may not know much about Cinder, but if she could find out about the lost Lunar Princess, then he could find out more about her. And he just knew where to start looking. Oh, great. Yeah, hooray. That means that we're going to get more Audrey and Pearl. Oh, fucking fantastic. Gotta love that. But the thing is that if he starts looking into Cinder, maybe he'll find out that Cinder actually is the princess. And then he's going to feel like such a damn fool the whole time. Why didn't I realize it? Why didn't I know? Oh, I'm so stupid. There's a lot of ways this can go. And just... I wonder where... Kai is going to start with talking to Audrey and Pearl. I know that. I don't know that, but I know that. And I'm curious to see what Dr. Erland has in store as we double back a little bit for Cinder. For a real plan. Strategizing. Alright, we're getting a little sip of whatever this is. When I read, I look at the patio right here, and I try and leave the door open so my pups can lay out in the sun. But also, for some reason, one of the trees just down the way has a yellow jacket problem, and they had to put like one of those yellow jacket trap things on that tree. So whenever I leave this door open, I'm happy the pups are enjoying the sunshine. I'm happy that we're getting some fresh air in here. I'm also fucking terrified that eventually a yellow jacket's gonna come in here and sting my fucking face while I'm reading a book. So that's something that could happen. Babies. I gotta get some lunch in me. What time is it? I gotta get some lunch in me. Ugh. Chapter 23. This time when Cress awoke, it was not sand engulfing her, although there was plenty of that, but arms. Thorne had pulled her against him so close that she could feel the rise and fall of his chest and his breath on the back of her neck. She groggily peeled her eyelids open. Night had fallen. The moon had returned, larger than the night before and surrounded by a sea of stars that winked and glittered at them. She was deathly thirsty, and couldn't find any saliva to wet her parched tongue. She began to shiver, despite the layers of sheets and blankets and the parachute and the heat rising off her scorched skin, despite Thorne's protective warmth. Teeth rattling, she nestled against him as much as she could. His embrace tightened around her. She looked up. The stars were moving, swirling over her head like a whirlpool trying to suck the whole planet into its depths. The stars were taunting her, laughing. She shut her eyes tight and was met with visions of Sybil's cruel smile. News headlines echoed in her head, spoken in a child's nasally voice. 14 cities attacked. Hold up. She was met with visions of Sybil's cruel smile, news headlines, okay, in a child's nasally voice.
14 cities attacked. Largest massacre in Third Era. 1,600 deaths.
Cress! Cress, wake up! She jolted, still shaking. Thorne was hovering above her, his eyes bright with moonlight. He found her face, pressing his palm to her forehead, and cursed. You're running a fever.
I'm cold.
He rubbed her arms. I'm sorry. I know you're not going to like this, but we need to get up. We need to keep moving. They were the cruelest words he could have said. She felt impossibly weak. Her whole body seemed to be made of sand that would blow apart with the slightest breeze. Cress, are you still with me? He cupped her cheeks in both hands. His skin was cool and soothing.
I can't.
Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth when she spoke. Yes, you can. It'll be better to walk at night when it's cool than to try and move during the day. You understand that, right?
My feet hurt, and I'm so dizzy.
Thorne grimaced. She thought of stroking her fingers through his hair. In all the pictures she'd seen of him, even his jail pictures, he'd been so polished, so neat. But now he was a wreck, with whiskers on his chin and dirt in his hair. It did not make him any less handsome. Aww. I know you don't want to keep going, he said. I know you deserve a rest. But if we just lie here, you might never get up. She didn't think that sounded so awful, as the sand began to rock beneath her. She pressed her hand against his chest, seeking out the steadying heartbeat. She sighed happily when she found it. Her body began to dissolve, little grains of sand scattering.
Captain,
she muttered,
I think I'm in love with you.
An eyebrow shot up. She counted 6 beats of his heart before, suddenly, he laughed. Don't tell me it took you 2 whole days to realize that. I might be losing my touch. Her fingertips curled against him.
You knew?
That you're lonely and I'm irresistible? Yeah, I knew. Come on, Cress. You're getting up. Her head dropped into the sand, sleep threatening to take over. If he would just lie down beside her and take her into his arms, she would never have to get up again. Cress, hey, no more sleeping. I need you. Remember the vultures. Cress, vultures.
You don't need me. You wouldn't be here at all if it weren't for me.
Not true. Well, only kind of true. We've already been over this. She shuddered.
Do you hate me?
Of course not. And you should stop wasting your energy talking about stupid things. Scooping an arm beneath her shoulders, he forced her to sit up. She gripped his wrist.
Do you think you could ever love me back?
Cress, this is sweet. But aren't I the first guy you've ever met? Come on, up you go. But she turned her head away, dread pressing down on her. He didn't believe her. He didn't understand how intensely she felt. Hey, I get it, girl. Trust me. Oh, spades and aces and stars. You're not crying again, are you?
No?
She bit her lip. It wasn't a lie. She certainly wanted to cry, but her eyes were all dried up. Thorne pulled a hand through his hair, knocking away a cloud of sand. Yes, he said firmly. We are obviously soulmates. Now please, stand up.
You've probably told lots of girls you love them.
Well, yeah, but I would have reconsidered if I'd known you were going to hold it against me. Misery washing over her, she crumpled against his side. Her head spun.
I'm dying,
she murmured, struck by the certainty of it.
I'm going to die. And I've never even been kissed.
Cress! Cress! You're not going to die.
We were going to have such a passionate romance too. Like in the dramas, but... No. I'll die alone. Never kissed. Not once.
He groaned, but it was out of frustration, not heartbreak. Ugh. Listen, Cress, I hate to break this to you, but I am sweaty and itchy and haven't brushed my teeth in 2 days. This just isn't a good time for romance. She squeaked and tucked her head beneath her knees, trying to get the world to stop turning so fast. The hopelessness of their situation was crushing her. The desert would never end. They would never get out. Thorne would never love her back. Cress, look at me. Are you looking at me?
Mm-hmm.
She mumbled. Thorne hesitated. I don't believe you. No, he wouldn't say it that straight. He would say, I don't believe you. No. Are you looking at me? I don't believe you. There you go. That's it. You have to close your eyes to envision. There. Sighing, she pried her head up so she could peer at him through the curtain of chopped hair.
I'm looking at you.
He crouched close to her and felt for her face. I promise I will not let you die without being kissed.
I'm dying now.
You are not dying.
But
I will be the judge of when you are dying, and when that happens, I guarantee you will get a kiss worth waiting for. But right now, you have to get up. She stared at him. Fuck, covering my mouth. She stared at him for a long moment. His eyes were surprisingly clear, almost like he could see her back. And he didn't flinch before her skeptical silence. He didn't grin nonchalantly or offer a teasing follow-up. He just waited. She couldn't help it when her attention drifted down to his mouth. She felt something stir inside her. Resolve.
do you promise?
He nodded. I promise. No, I promise. No.
Do you promise?
I promise. There you go. Shuddering at the pain that awaited her, she braced herself and held her hands out to him. The world tilted as he hoisted her up, and she stumbled, but Thorne held her until she was steady. Hunger gnawed at her empty stomach. Pain bit into her raw feet, shooting up through her legs and into her spine. Her whole face contorted, but she ignored it the best she could. With Thorne's help, she retied the sheet around her head. Are your feet bleeding? She could barely see them in the darkness, and they were still wrapped with the towels.
I don't know. They hurt. A lot.
Your fever might be from infection. He handed her the last bottle of water, now half full. Or you're dehydrated. Drink all of that. She paused with the water bottle already tipped against her mouth, carefully so as not to lose a single drop. It was a tempting offer. She could drink it all and still be thirsty, but... All of it, said Thorne. She drank until she could stop without her throat crying for more.
But what about you?
I've had my fill. She knew it wasn't true, but her tolerance for selflessness lessened with every gulp, and soon she'd done as he asked and drank it all. She stood wavering on her feet with the bottle turned up to the sky, hoping to capture another drop, until she was sure there was nothing left. She swooned, longingly placing the empty bottle into the blanket sack on Thorne's shoulder. Peering at the horizon, she spotted the mountainous shadow, still so far away. Thorne picked up his cane, and she forced herself to take in 3 solid breaths before she started, hoping that they would give her courage. She estimated the amount of steps it would take to reach the next sand dune, and then began counting. 1 foot in front of the other. Warm air in, warm air out. The fantasy of being a brave explorer had long since dissipated, but she still clung to the knowledge that Thorne was relying on her. She plodded up the dune as her teeth began to chatter again. She stumbled twice. She tried to call up comforting daydreams. A soft bed, a worn blanket, sleeping in well past the sunrise, in a softly lit room where flowers grew outside the windowsill, walking up in Thorne's arms. His fingers stroking her hair the hair off her brow, his lips pressing a good morning kiss against her temple. But she couldn't hold on to them. She had never known a room like that, and the hard-earned visions were too quickly overshadowed by pain. 1 dune came and went. She was already panting. 2 dunes. The mountains lingered tauntingly in the distance. Every time they topped one, she would focus on the next. We'll just crest that hill, and then I'll sit for a minute. Just 1 more. But instead of letting herself rest when the goal was reached, she chose another and kept going. Thorne didn't comment when she slipped and landed on her knees. He just picked her up and set her back on her feet. He said nothing when her pace slowed to a mere crawl. So long as they didn't stop, his presence was reassuring, never impatient, never harsh. After ages of delirious, mind-numbing progress through the sand, when she felt as though every limb were about to fall off, the sky to the east began to brighten, and Cress realized that the landscape was changing. The sand dunes were becoming shorter and shallower, and, not far in the distance, they seemed to end in a long, flat plain of rocky red soil, dotted with scarce prickly shrubs. Beyond that began the foothills of the mountains. She glanced at Thorne and was surprised to catch the evidence of exhaustion etched into his features, though he replaced it with steadfast determination as they came to a stop. She described the sight as well as she could. "Can you guess how long it will take to reach those shrubs?" She estimated, unable to bear the panic that it would turn out to be another illusion, and that the respite of sand and swells would flee farther away with every step they took. "No." He nodded. "That's all right. We'll try to get to them before it gets too hot. We might be able to get some dew off their branches." Dew. Water. Even just a lick, just a taste. Never again she would snub a single muddy gulp. She started again, her legs screaming with the first few steps until they began to numb again to the endless walking. Then her eyes snagged onto something big and white, and she froze. Thorne crashed into her, and Cress would have collapsed if she hadn't wrapped his arms around her shoulders, steadying her. "What's wrong?" "There's an animal." "No, shoot. There's an animal," she whispered, afraid to startle the creature that stood at the top of the dune. It had already seen them and was staring serenely at Cress. She tried to place it with what she knew of earth and wildlife. A goat of some sort? A gazelle? It had slender white legs atop enormous hooves, and a rounded belly that showed the edges of ribs. Its calm face was tan with swaths of black and white, like a mask around its eyes. 2 spiraling horns twisted up from his head, doubling its height. This was the first earthen animal she had ever seen, and it was beautiful and regal and mysterious, watching her with dark, unblinking eyes. For a moment she imagined she could speak to it with her mind, ask it to lead them to safety. It would recognize the goodness inside her and take pity, like an ancient animal goddess sent to guide her to her destiny. "An animal?" Thorne said, and she realized he'd been waiting for her to further explain what she was seeing. "It has long legs and horns and it's beautiful." "Oh, good. We're back to this then." She could hear the smile in his tone, but she dared not take her gaze from the creature, lest it dissolve into the air like a phantom. "Could mean there's a water source nearby," Thorne mused. "We should keep going." Cress took a tentative step forward. She felt the slip of sand more keenly than she had before, and recognized just how clumsy she and Thorne were, stumbling and scrambling over the dunes, while this creature stood so elegant and calm. The creature tilted its head, not moving as Cress inched closer. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until the beast's eyes flickered, and it turned its head towards something on the other side of the dune. The crack of a gunshot rang out across the desert. A caravan, perhaps? Poachers? Hunters? Bad men? Good men? That's gonna really fuck up Cress. Her first earthen animal, and it got fucking murked. Poor kid. Poor animal. I hope they're okay. I need to get some lunch in me. Thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna go eat. Bye. There's a lot to look forward to. I don't know what kind of animal it sounds like. I really hope they explain, because like I thought it was like a goat or something. But then the black and white on its head, I don't know, that threw me off. Like a zebra mutant or something like that. What the fuck? Why'd I say zebra? It's zebra. Anyway. Bye!